My daughter used to ask for the pouches at the store, the ones with the smiling bear on the front, and I would turn the box over in my hands before I ever said no, just to see what was actually printed there. Stay with me, because what I make instead costs about $1, not $5, and it takes about 15 minutes from a warm stove to a cold spoon. There is a number I want you to sit with for a moment, unexplained, before I tell you what it means. $300. That is what a family with 2 children eating 1 pouch a day can spend in a single year on something dressed up to look like fruit. I am not going to explain that number yet. I'm going to let it sit there while I show you what is actually inside the pouch you already have in your cupboard. Before we go further, I want to ask you something, and I mean it honestly, not as a formality. How many of these pouches came home with your groceries last week? Was it 1 box, or was it 3? Tucked into the cart without much thought because they are cheap and the children ask for them by name. Tell me the number in the comments if you are willing, not to shame anyone, myself included, when I still bought things like this before I knew better, but because I think you will be surprised when you add it up over a year the way I just did. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. A box of these pouches runs somewhere around $4 to $5, which works out to close to 50 cents a single pouch. That sounds small, almost too small to think about. And that is exactly the trick of it. You are not just paying 50 cents for a little bag of chewy shapes. You are paying 50 cents every single day to hand your child something whose first ingredient is very often corn syrup or plain sugar, with the fruit itself reduced down to a whisper of concentrate, present mostly so the company can print the word fruit on the front of the box. And here is where it gets interesting. That same 50 cents is also buying the colour, the bright, even cartoon red or cartoon blue that no real strawberry or blueberry has ever produced on its own, coming instead from dyes with names like numbers, red 40, blue 1, sitting in the ingredient list a few lines below the sugar. 2 kinds of quiet cost stacked on top of each other every single day, and neither one announces itself on the front of the box. We didn't read labels growing up. We didn't need to. We made it ourselves from what came out of the garden or the root cellar. And if something was going to be sweet, we knew exactly what had made it that way, because our own hands had done it. That is not a boast. It is just what happens when nothing is manufactured between you and your food. Stay with me, because the reason these pouches look the way they do is not an accident, and it is not a mystery. It is a substitution, plain and simple. Real fruit is expensive. It spoils. Its colour is uneven from one batch to the next, and it does not hold a uniform, chewy shape sitting on a warehouse shelf for months. So it gets replaced, in small percentages, with the things that are cheap, shelf-stable, and perfectly consistent. Sugar, syrup, and dye. Not because the company failed at making a fruit snack, because the whole category was built from the very beginning to look like fruit while behaving like candy. Cheaper to produce, longer to sit on a shelf, and easier to colour exactly the same shade every single time. I bought a box last week specifically to show you this, and I still have it here on the counter. Turning it over, the price sticker is still stuck to the corner. $4 and some change, faded a little where my thumb has already rubbed across it. The plastic of the pouch itself is cold from the refrigerator, and when you press it, it makes almost no sound at all. No give, just a flat little slap of plastic against plastic, nothing like the soft weight of real fruit in your palm. The ingredient list on the back is printed so small I had to hold it at arm's length to read comfortably. And this is what the ingredient list shows. Corn syrup, then sugar, then a fraction of a percent of fruit concentrate, then the dyes, then the preservatives that make it possible for this pouch to sit in a warehouse for the better part of a year without changing. I opened one pouch, and the smell that came up was sweet in that flat, one-note way. Not the smell of a bruised peach or a burst berry, just sugar with a hint of something fruit-adjacent stapled onto it. The taste on the tongue afterward is that same aggressive, uniform sweetness, sitting there a beat too long. Nothing like the way real fruit fades and changes as you chew. Now, I want to be honest with you about something else. If you are the kind of person who reads the side of the jar before you ever look at the front, if you already turn things over in the store the way I just turned this one over on my counter, you already know what is coming next. Because there is a version of this that skips the corn syrup, skips the dye, skips the year on a shelf, and costs about the change you would find in your car's cup holder. And it comes together in less time than it took me to read you that ingredient list out loud. There is a woman I used to can preserves with, years ago, who first showed me that gelatin and real juice could set up into something a child would reach for just as fast as anything from a box. She did not measure carefully. She poured juice into a small pot, sprinkled in gelatin, added a spoonful of honey, and stirred until it dissolved, then poured the whole warm mixture into a shallow dish and set it in the icebox overnight. By morning, it had firmed into something you could cut into little squares with a knife, chewy at the edges, softer toward the center, tasting exactly like whatever juice had gone into the pot. Grape, if that is what you poured. Cherry, if that is what you had on hand. Nothing pretending, nothing borrowed from a dye bottle. Just the fruit, doing what fruit already does when you give it the smallest push. Here is how I make it now, and it holds to 5 steps, no more. First, warm the fruit juice gently in a small pot over low heat, just until it steams a little, without letting it boil hard. Second, sprinkle the gelatin over the warm juice and whisk it in until every grain has dissolved and the liquid runs smooth. Third, stir in a spoonful of honey while the mixture is still warm, tasting as you go, since juices vary in their own sweetness, and you may want more or less. Fourth, pour the warm mixture into a shallow dish, or into small silicone molds if you have them. Fifth, set the dish in the refrigerator and let it rest, undisturbed, for several hours or overnight, until it has firmed all the way through. 3 ingredients: juice, gelatin, honey, and nothing else needs to come near it. I will admit, the first few times I made these, I rushed the honey in while the juice was too hot, and it changed the flavour in a way I did not care for. A faint, cooked sweetness instead of the bright fruit taste I wanted. It took me longer than I like to admit to realise the honey should go in once the juice has come down off the direct heat. Warm but not scalding, so its own flavour stays soft in the background, instead of pushing forward. That is the whole thing once you know it. A small patience, nothing more. While it chills, the kitchen carries the smell of warm fruit and honey for a good while afterward, the way a pot of stewed peaches might, sweet and a little steamy, settling into the room. And when you finally turn the dish out and cut the first square free, there is a soft, faint sound as it releases from the dish, almost a sigh. Nothing like the flat slap of plastic pouches on a refrigerator shelf. Now, I want to be honest with you about the limits of this, because I am not going to pretend otherwise. These will not last for months in a cupboard, the way the store pouches do. They belong in the refrigerator, and you will want to eat them within a matter of days, not weeks. They also will not go into a lunchbox at the same room temperature all morning, the way a shelf-stable pouch can, since they soften if they sit out too long in the warmth. And if you do not already keep juice and gelatin on hand, that first trip to gather them takes a little more thought than grabbing a familiar box off a familiar shelf. This is not a perfect replacement for convenience. It is a replacement for what is actually going into your child's body. And those are two different kinds of convenience. And I think it is only fair that you know exactly which one you are trading for which. The thing I keep coming back to, turning that cold plastic pouch over in one hand and a warm dish of real fruit in the other, is that a food does not have to lie about what it is in order to be loved by a child. My own children loved these squares just as fast as they ever loved anything from a box, and nothing about them needed a cartoon bear or a dye bottle to make that happen. If there is a principle underneath all of this, it is simply that real food does not need to borrow a costume. Tell me in the comments what fruit you would try first. Grape? Cherry? Peach? Something else entirely? One word is enough. I read every one of them. That $300 I asked you to sit with earlier, that is roughly what a family spends across a year buying 50-cent pouches of sugar and dye dressed up as fruit for 2 children eating 1 a day. And the 15 minutes I promised you at the very start. Juice, gelatin, honey, warmed, poured, and chilled overnight. That is the whole of what replaces it. 2 loops, closed, side by side. The way the price and the harm always were the whole time I was talking to you. I haven't bought that box again, and looking at what sits in my refrigerator right now, I don't imagine I ever will.